I would play one and then play another and then play another. And I'm starting to get to this idea of existential dread. Why is it that I'm doing all the things that I'm doing here? What's my end goal here? Hi there, welcome to Games Over Coffee Consulting. I have a new space that I'm in. How cool is that? Today we're talking about ZomWick by Cookie Koala. ZomWick is a tower defense game that is kind of arcade style, but it's not really tower defense in the way that you would think tower defense games usually are. So usually in tower defense games, you set up towers and you have enemies that come through. You try to, destroy them all before they get to your base or whatever. But in this one, it has to do with a single enemy that is constantly pursuing you. And in this pursuit, you can't destroy him. You can only push him back further. And you don't really have a base. You have a single gun that shoots pellets. You place like these towers that also just slow down the enemy. So the whole thing is about slowing him down. The way that the developer described his game was a non-violent tower defense game. I don't know if ZomWick is supposed to be a play on words. The character kind of looks like John Wick, except with blonde hair. Anyway, so that's what the game is. So before I get started, I want to point out the positives because this whole video is going to be about the negatives, right? It's going to be about constructive criticisms. I didn't sense any bugs. I didn't see any glitches in this game. This game feels pretty polished. The game is really engaging. There was no point that I was really bored with the game. I was constantly involved. It never felt like I was being pushed away. It feels really good to play this game on the keyboard and mouse. It feels actually pretty good also on the Steam Deck. It feels pretty good to go from controls to a touchscreen, drag and drop the weapons. That felt really good to do. So moving on from there, I want to talk about motivation, specifically because the developer told me this. He said, for me, it's very hard to see and find out a gameplay that makes the player want to return and play again and again. The idea of getting the player and keeping them in your game, that is strong engagement. And actually, this game does have pretty good engagement already. But I think the idea that you're going for here is less about engagement and more about motivation, at least for me. When I was playing this game, I did feel a little bit lack of motivation. Generally, motivation comes from some sort of gameplay loop that is trying to get to a certain place. Super Mario Bros., you had a very light narrative of saving the princess, and in Sonic the Hedgehog, it stopped Dr. Eggman. You always have this master thing that's happening, this macro level thing that's happening. Usually in a lot of newer games, it has to do with some sort of light narrative, and I felt like that was lacking here in this game in ZomWick. When I'm playing ZomWick, I would play one and then play another and then play another, and I'm starting to get to this idea of existential dread. Why is it that I'm doing all the things that I'm doing here? What's my end goal here? And if the idea is to keep stopping this one person from pursuing you, like that's a really unique idea of having one singular enemy that's constantly on you. And in every single level, he's always there and you can't stop him. I think that's interesting, but there's no macro goal there that I see. One of the examples that I love to bring up all the time, and you guys are probably sick and tired of hearing this, is Portal. After it was purchased by Valve, they started creating some sort of game where the player was trying to escape some sort of prison. In this idea of escaping the prison, when they gave it to playtesters didn't really understand that there was an ending to the game. Like it felt like one big tutorial. They're like, okay, cool. Now that I've escaped the prison, so this is where the game starts, right? Is that what happens? But no, that was the end of the game. And the reason why people thought that is because there's no motivating factor. Mark Laidlaw was famous for writing the story of Portal. He said that during playtesting, there was a lot of people that were asking why the gameplay was even happening in the first place. When Mark identified that, he said that there was no pressure to motivate them. That's where they added Gladys, right? Gladys being the antagonist for Portal. The whole idea of adding structure onto your game can follow just a myriad of different ways. But when you're adding structure, it's not just because other games have done it. It's because you need to motivate the player to somehow finish what they're doing. Otherwise, all you have is a tech demo. If you just gave a tech demo to people, yeah, it's fun for a while, but what's my purpose? Why do I keep playing? This doesn't have to be a narrative thing. In fact, in ZomWick, during that first tutorial part, I felt a sense of direction. And it was because every level that I played had a purpose to it. This first level was to learn the basic layout of the game. Then you have different types of towers, then you have different types of other things. But it was cool because every single layer had me learn something new. And even though there was no narrative, there was a sense of progression still. And it's because each level was designed to stack on top of the other. If you can hear, you probably hear the dog in the background. So now that we got the whole motivation stuff out of the way and everything, I wanted to talk about communication with this game, basic game design stuff, things that are involved in the mechanics and the menus. One thing that confused me, just the main mechanic of the game, which is dragging and dropping the towers onto their little spaces. What was a little confusing was some of them would instantly attack versus others that would wait. Sometimes the tower will instantly attack, like the one that shines a light, but some of them will shoot lightning, for example, and those ones don't instantly attack. They have a proximity sensor, so it waits till the enemy gets to a certain trigger point, then it shoots lightning at them and slows them down. The lightning ones, I don't know how many times they attack, but it feels like they attack around 2 to 3 times and then they blow up. The light ones instantly attack and then for a certain amount of time and then blow up. I don't know how much time they attack for. I don't know how much time they're supposed to attack for. I don't know if that when the lightning, hits the enemy, is it a certain amount of time that the lightning hits the enemy and then it blows up? Does it, strike maybe 3 to 5 times, then it blows up? I'm not sure. And the thing is, I need to know these things if I'm going to be building a skill. One thing about these towers is that when they blow up, they return to your inventory, which I thought was a little strange, but I like it. I like the idea that I don't run out of towers. That's cool. But they return to your inventory, meaning, okay, now I just drag and drop again? Why have them blow up in the first place? Is it for flexibility so that I can move the towers? I get what the idea is here. The idea is to provide a risk reward system, and the risk reward system has to do with putting in a little bit of risk for a little bit of reward. So one example that comes to mind in Pac-Man. In Pac-Man, when you go to eat the pellets, which are very far right in the corners, but if you do that, then you get to eat the ghosts. So you're putting a lot of risk for a pretty good reward. But the risk here that's involved in dragging and dropping the towers is that you drag and drop a tower, it attacks instantly or not, and then it blows up after a little bit, after a minute, I think. But that's the mechanic of the game, right? There's no reward in placing a tower in a certain area. That's just how you play. It feels kind of weird to have them blow up at all, especially if they're just returning to your inventory. Like, you're putting in risk for no reward. You're just putting in risk to just put the towers in there and just play the game. I feel like that's a little bit strange. The way that I would modify this to make it more risk reward is to have an add-on. So say you have a tower that you place, maybe it just attacks automatically in certain moments or whatever. You can click the tower in order to make it attack right then and there. But if you do that, then you have a drawback. Then maybe the tower blows up after a little bit, or maybe it doesn't attack after a long time. The point here is that you're giving the player a risk reward system. You're letting them introduce risk for a greater outcome, for a greater reward outcome. One thing I talked about earlier, symbols are hard. Symbols are difficult. The same symbol doesn't mean the same thing to every person. And I know that when I played this game, it was not immediately obvious what each symbol meant. I know that the play button meant play. That's been unchanged for a very long time. But the exit button on here was a person who's walking, like a crosswalk kind of person. And that confused me. I legitimately didn't know how to exit the game, and I just clicked every button until I got out. The idea of putting symbols into your work and then assuming that people are going to find out what they are is kind of hard. Now, you can do it in the menu. That's okay. People will eventually learn how to exit the game. That's not a big deal. The idea is to lessen the friction that you have with someone. If you have a lot of friction in your game, if someone doesn't know how to exit, then they don't know how to get to the settings, and this is their first time playing the game, they're not going to give you the time of day. That's just how players are. If you have a large library of games and you're just like, oh, you know what? I'm going to take time out of my day to go ahead and try this one that I've never played before, and then it has friction, no, they're not going to stay. They're just, okay, I'm done with this. Uninstall, what negative review. So symbols are just kind of risky to use, but if you know how to use them, then fine. And I have no qualms with it. But the idea of using symbols in the menu is okay, whereas using symbols inside the gameplay for actual mechanic elements, that's where it gets more frictiony. That's where, it gets really difficult to explain to the player why they need to do certain things. And in this game, there's a lot of symbols that are inside the gameplay, and I just don't know what any of them mean. There's a lot of bars in this game, and I don't know what the bars do. After playing the game several times, I've started to understand that whenever your pellet hits the little character guy, that there's a little bar that increases. I don't know what that does, but after a while, it seemed that after that bar filled up, then it increased another bar, and I think the music changed. I think the enemy runs faster at that point. I'm not exactly sure. Also, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to fill up that bar, if I want to fill up that bar. I don't know. There's also another bar on the opposite side of the screen, at the lower left hand, and this bar doesn't appear for some time, and I actually like the idea that the developer is doing here. You're introducing certain elements at certain times, not all at once. That's really good. I like that. But I still don't know what they mean. The big green bar at the bottom surrounded by gold has a very opus magnum feel to it. These symbols that are in the green bar, I don't know what they mean. And there's 3 of them. And the green, I don't know why the green bar fills up, but once it does, it hits certain symbols at certain times. You can click those symbols to open up a sub menu that's also just symbols. The idea that they are existing within the gameplay that's pressure sensitive. I have to make split-second decisions, you know, in this game. The character is getting too close to one of my things, or he's about to hit a conveyor belt or something. I need to stop him like as soon as possible. And I can't be, you know, trying to figure out what certain menus mean at this time. I mean, the whole thing is timed also. You know, I don't want to have to experiment with these things. Like, I'd be even okay with like a how to play type of, you know, tutorial that's hidden away in the menu. I just want to be able to know what they mean. But I'm certainly not going to try to experiment, especially if there's 9 different buttons here. In fact, there was one time that I think I clicked one, either erased my weapons or took all of them away or refilled my weapons. I can't remember exactly what it did, but it did something that I didn't want it to do. And that, you know, increased that friction for me. So I didn't like that. That all being said, if you introduce some sort of macro element, I would somehow put something into the game to make the player aware that there is a larger thing here going on, whether that's a narrative, a structure of some sort of level map maybe. I know you said there was going to be more enemies later on, so I'd like to know, you know, who they are and why they are. One thing that happened is every time that I completed a level, there was a car that drove up and it sounded like a gunshot went off. The enemy fell and then got back up. I don't know what that was about. There was a whole moment with where the camera view changes and the enemy gets to your gun. The camera goes into a first-person mode, and during this time, you're supposed to shoot certain things at certain times. You're specifically supposed to shoot these force fields that are like orange around the area. I had no idea that I was supposed to do that until I just randomly clicked everywhere. I thought I was supposed to shoot him, like the enemy, with this lightning bolt. That whole mini game kind of thing needed much more clarification to me. This dog over here, man. So if you introduce some sort of macro element, some sort of level structure, I think that would be really good. Maybe a narrative, doesn't have to be, you can do whatever you want. I would just, you know, focus on the type of experience that you're trying to provide. It seems like you're trying to provide a type of arcade experience. And if that's the way you want to, then I would say introduce some sort of score or some sort of reinforcement, something to let the player know that what they're doing is making them go toward some sort of goal. When I got to the end of levels, a lot of times I was just like, well, did I do it? Did something happen? I never felt like there was a completeness, you know, to everything. I think that's about all I have to say. So thank you so much, Cookie Koala, that's your name. Thank you so much, Cookie Koala, for submitting this game to me. I'm really glad that a game like this exists. Like, it's really unnerving to me to have an enemy that's just constantly trying to get the player, like constantly. Like there was no time that the enemy died, right? when I finally stopped him, my anxiety stopped. So, you know, you could even play on that if you wanted to do some sort of narrative. You could play on the idea that the player is feeling anxiety during this ever-present threat. Kudos to you for making some sort of interesting feeling game. I thought that was really cool. If you're not this developer and you have a game that you want feedback on, you can submit it to me. There is a link in the description, or you can go to this website, gamesover.coffee. I also have another channel. I have a Discord. There's a bunch of other people there that are very helpful. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys there.